copies of these packets and agendas, if I need a hard copy.
Okay, yes, need a hard copy. So we'll call the meeting to order. Any changes to the minutes from last time? Did we get those out?
I have a question.
Yes.
Under comments about the ADUs, it says that there was a consensus that short-term rentals were not an option. I don't recall that conversation.
I know we talked about it and we had the back and forth. I thought that it was a consensus, but you thought it was a consensus in the other way, so.
No, I thought the only consensus was that the ADUs could be 50% of whether it was
Okay.
RR or what, whatever.
Well, I thought that was a consent, I agree with.
That was
consent.
I agree with that statement. And the question is whether they were allowed for short-term rental.
Right.
Which I don't think we had exactly resolved. We're hoping to resolve.
Okay. Well, maybe we could put that still to be determined. If you want to.
I mean, I guess it's just whatever's in the ordinance. Governance.
Is there anything in the ordinance now on short-term rentals? For you?
Yeah, I'd have to look again, but I believe one, look at the ADU, but I believe one short-term rental would be allowable.
I mean, I know we had to have, I think you clarified that we had to have the owner
On the premises.
on the premises. But other than that, I guess meaning by no short-term rental, you mean they couldn't put an ADU on there and rent it right away, even it had to be a year long or
No, short-term rental by definition is 30 days or less.
30 days?
If it's more than 30 days, then it doesn't qualify as short-term.
You're just trying to.
Airbnb would be.
Yeah, trying to include that. I don't know what the ordinance says anything about it or not. Yeah.
But we definitely would want that qualified.
Yeah.
Good point, because we can't even agree to it right now. So it couldn't have been in the minutes that we came to a consensus because we don't even know right now.
It should be.
So I'm ready to just change the minutes and move on, and we'll confirm that. Is everybody good with that amendment? We're just going to strike that line?
Yes.
Well, proposed language maybe was discussed, and we could say it was discussed, because it was discussed.
Yeah, we did talk about it, but I don't think there was consensus. So how do you want to suggest we change that line? Because I don't have it in front of me still.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's still, any decision was pending a clarification of what the ordinance actually says. We just don't know.
Right, but I'm saying for the minutes, what do we want to have last month's minutes say? That's what we need him for her to hear on tape and change to what.
Can't you just strike that comment?
Well, that's what I said. But
Yeah.
we did have discussion about it, so just strike the comment about it being a consensus.
I think it's just a misunderstanding.
You good with that, Bridget? Okay. All right. All in favor of the, well, you make that in form of a motion.
So moved.
Yeah. All in favor of the motion to adopt the minutes with the change to the ADU statement about short-term rental?
Aye.
Aye. All right, moving on. What's on next on the agenda? Because I can't even bring the electronic one up. Okay.
So it was just a discussion. We would start in with a discussion on this points that I emailed out, sort of taking it from the strategic plan, and I can bring those up. I got some hard copies on the way right now. I thought, the easiest thing to do is just kind of go through these different 8 or 9 points that I thought on, just sort of knock them out as a group. Move on to the next one.
Okay.
I did have actually one, just a clarifying point. I don't want to leave this kind of out, I think in the course of things, it was, I think inadvertently suggested that back in the I-1 review, we had said, that a parcel of land, and we're talking about going into prior district, would command a appraised value of 450 some odd thousand dollars. But I think we're going to be real clear, it's important for the methodology, what we actually applied. That figure of 400, what have you, $40,000 was what the average in the parcel of a parcel that was fully built out and done would be delivered in terms of value. And, that's based on the historical data that we have.
Right.
But I mean, a raw piece of land that you put into there, that wouldn't command any more necessarily than any other raw piece of land, which is far cry from where it would be once it was built out as a business. So, I mean, we should clarify that. That's an important relevant methodology. That's about all I have.
All right, go ahead, Luke.
All right, well, I'll go ahead and start with our first topic, and this was the family subdivision, and I think the kind of the big take, we had a little bit of conversation last time. The takeaway was the consideration the board was considering in A10. Right now, we have the 5 and 3. There's been talk about making that 3 and 2. So 5 would have to be you have to have a minimum 8 acres. The parent tract would be 5. The new tract would be 3 under the current rules. There's consideration, I think pretty seriously, changing that to 3 and 2. I think that's the number that's been used. The only thing would be the new parcel that parent would, as it is now, is a 5-year requirement. You have to own the parcel for 5 years. You have that 8 acres, you have to own it for 5 years. You make that new parcel, and it has to also be owned by 5 years. So 5 years ownership, new parcel would be, before it could be sold or transferred, would have to be owned for 5 years. I guess, again, the big change is, 5 and 3 would be 3 and 2. One of the other items that we've kind of discussed a little bit on staff and is if you divide that new tract off, is you have to own it for 5 years. Would it also maybe start for the parent tract? Would it also maybe you'd also have to own it for 5 more additional years before that could be transferred? If you follow my logic there. So, in other words,
Both parcels. Tom.
right. So does this kind of start the clock over on that? In other words, I divide 3 acres, 2 acres off to my daughter, but then decide, well, I've owned this for 5 years. I'm gonna go ahead now and sell this, my parent tract. So one of the things that we've discussed a little bit is truly making it a situation where these narrow situations where it's the family members, people who probably have occupied the property for quite some time, have no real intention. I think, at least from what I've heard in the past, it was sort of used to kind of circumvent the subdivision ordinance, and people divided it, sold off the parent tract immediately. So just kind of want to get your general thoughts on reducing that to 3 and 2, and then maybe keeping that 5-year hold on the child lot, I might want to call it. That's Sean, thank you. And then, do we want to maybe think about, on the parent tract, saying, look, you need to, you just can't divide a lot off and then we're out of here. I hadn't really thought about that before. And communities are all over the place. I mean, Powhatan's is pretty narrow, that goes to children. I think grandkids are also involved, a spouse, but I know some communities even do it to where you can go to nieces and nephews. We're pretty, Powhatan's very narrow. It's, children, a spouse, and that's.
Parent, it's straight up and down.
Parent, right. So it doesn't go anywhere out that, it doesn't branch out. So I think it's already pretty narrow. So I guess those would be the two sort of questions, or maybe several questions in there. Does 3 and 2 sound like a reasonable change? I think that most people would probably nod their head and say the 5 for the new parcel, you've got to own it for 5. The that, you know, to my daughter, got it on for 5 years where she can transfer it, but the little hook maybe is on that parent track. What are your thoughts on maybe that also having to be on for 5 years as well? That way, in my head, you really are narrowing it down to people that are really just using it for, you know, I'll call it solid family situations, but.
And they can still get out of that by appealing to the Board of Supervisors in a subdivision ordinance appeal?
It's written now that you can actually appeal to the planning director, but it would need to be, you're pretty sure that that's positive, that's the way it's written. Because I know it had it happen, you know.
Is that the parent track we're talking about?
Well, yeah.
Well, it's any of it that they've agreed to in this division, they could appeal, that used to be to the Board of Supervisors.
Okay.
Or either planning commission, might have been planning commission. But I didn't realize they had changed it to.
Yeah, I mean, there would be I don't know if we need to kind of write the ordinance necessarily, you know, here, but, you know, the thought is that, yes, there would be you know, ability to make some sort of appeal. I mean, for me personally, I'd rather be appealed to the board, you know.
Yeah, that's what I would.
I just like, you know, someone comes in and says, hey, you know, I got transferred or this and that, that's fine, but to me, I just sort of like for those things to sort of go to the board, make an appeal in those cases, so.
Seems to me the current language says that there are situations,
Yeah,
hardships.
Mhm, right.
that would Allow for that to change, you know, doesn't say that. For any other reason.
One question I had on it is, so I'm just thinking here off the top of the head on it, let's say you started with a 10-acre parcel. So on this, you could start with a 10 and you divide it off of 2, right?
Leaving 8.
Leaving 8, and again, you got a load with, right, 3 and 2. So you divide it off of 2, now you leave you with 8, and I don't know, in this case, I don't see why you would again possibly be able to divide off another 2. That's the second one, leaves you with 6, right? Divide another one, right? That leaves you with 4, so now you've added 3, right? And I guess at that point, you couldn't divide off another one because you're at 4.
Right.
So you'd have the original parcel, right, the original house, and 3 more, which would basically make it about, you know, a little more than a R2 situation. I mean, you'd be down to a density, right, 2.5 units, right, from what was an A10 property. I'm not sure whether that's exactly a good idea or not. That's not so clear to me.
You can only do it once, right?
Yeah.
You can only do it once to
Sure,
one
you know,
person.
at one time?
To one person, yeah, that's definitely.
Yeah, but wait. So I couldn't, for example, if I wanted to split that off, if I had 2, I was gonna give this to my daughter,
Yes,
and I want to give another 2 to my son,
yes,
and another 2 to my grandchild.
no.
Yes,
Can't give the grandchild with family division.
yeah, you can.
Not,
Split them down the line.
He said
And
he
you
said
can
he
do
could.
something eventually.
He just said he could.
oh, I thought you had to give it to a parent. So a parent can give it to a person can give it to their parent or down directly to their child. It didn't used to be able to go from a grandparent to a grandchild. When I say straight up and down, that's not skipping a generation, that's straight up and down. So if a grandparent gave it to a parent, and then a few years down the road, a parent gave it to a child, yes, that does describe it, but you can't give some directly to your grandchild, is the way it used to be. I've been out of zoning for a while, so I know that ordinance has been tweaked quite a few times.
Well, it's important. I mean, you can't, you know, even if you had, let's say,
But if you went from grandparent to grandchild, it had to be the 10-acre lot, which is, that's what happened on Trinum Road.
but if you had, even if you, and we need a clarification.
Yeah, I
But
agree.
even if we had, let's say, for example, you had a couple of children, and maybe a parent were willing on this situation, so you'd give, right, 2 for you, 2 for you, and 2 for you.
Mm-hmm.
And when the end of the 5 years comes up, whether they ever actually moved into the thing or not, whatever happened, now I can just rent those properties out as 3 rental properties. Well, actually, I can sell them, because they're cut off. Yeah, I could sell them off here.
You couldn't, that kid that you gave it to
5 years.
could. You couldn't, the kid that you gave it to. You have to change ownership. Like when you're splitting it off.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
can't
right.
leave yourself on that title.
No,
That has
no,
to go
yeah.
to the child, so you have given up control of that parcel as the individual. Now, if the child then just sat on it for 5 years, never built and then sold, you are correct.
But I did end up effectively subdividing my property into 4 parcels, 10 acres, isn't that, basically, that's what's happened.
Absolutely. I mean, but that's the case now. I mean, I got 5 kids. Yes.
You're gonna put all those puppies on 10 acres?
Nope. They're all buying their own land.
Oh, my own.
In different counties. And would that be done as one family subdivision? You would do the 10 acres down, like in Bob's example, you would do the 4 parcels?
If you had those all that you wanted to do it at once, you could do it at once.
You do it
One
all.
time.
Typically, it happens over time, not all at the same time, but if it's legit.
Right.
If it's somebody trying to circumvent the ordinance, then you may see some all at once and, hey, here's your college fund,
Right. Sit on it for 5 years.
Right, sit on it for 5 years and then sell it. But
Does the child have to have a residence there for 5 years or just ownership?
ownership. Ownership.
So one of the changes would be appeals to the board, but what was the other idea?
The parent track having to start a 5-year hold on that as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you don't have plans to do a family subdivision today, you probably shouldn't have plans to do it within the next 5 years for the most part, if it's really a family matter.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I would think that would be a reasonable request from the property owner to say, figure it out now, do the subdivision once, so that he doesn't have to review it 4 times in 5 years. Right?
And the ordinance says immediate family member, which I think would need to go to state code, which the question is if grandkids.
If a grandparent can give it directly to a grandkid.
Right.
I thought the answer to that was no.
It depends on that immediate. To me, immediate would probably be no. I mean, I have to check the definition.
Do you know, Doug? Do you know if it's allowed? Have you known? Yeah. I mean,
You
Doug does subdivision
can
stuff.
cut off a piece to a sibling also. You can go this way or this way, you can't go to nieces and nephews, aunts
Right.
and uncles, but you can give your sister one if you wanted to. As
Yeah,
well.
Right.
The state says immediate family members, spouse, children, parent, brother, sister.
The whole, you talking
So
about,
no
So
grandparent.
no grant.
That's what I heard.
And just a follow-up question from what David just mentioned, clarified. So you made the subdivision right away, one of the parcels you put that in. So now, so let's say I'm the son and it came to me, and that's fine, I'm happy to have the title of it and so forth. Was there anything preventing me though from, instead of living there, to rent it to somebody? It's just my property, no.
Well, you gotta build a house. That
Well,
would
I
be
gotta
the
build a
first
house,
option.
I wasn't gonna rent without a house, but if I have to build a house, but I mean, is
Well,
there?
they'll rent without a house too.
But there's nothing to prevent that.
I don't think so, it's just property ownership. It's just subdivision. It doesn't matter if they can rent it. So
What's that now?
Bob was asking if they could rent.
The family division affidavit that they sign with it, does it prevent rental?
Yes.
I thought it did.
Yes, it does.
Oh.
I mean, I'm not real surprised that it does, because that kind of gets away from whatever the intent was for a family cut. you
Right.
know. So it's really just a mechanism to get rental property. But I wouldn't, so, but you're confident of that?
I mean, I haven't looked at the affidavit in a while, but I feel like
I thought it was in the affidavit that has to get recorded with your
Right.
deed.
I mean, I
The
was,
same thing that includes the 5-year that goes with the deed, so a title company would find that when they tried to sell it or whatever.
So this is only applying to A10, R2, and RU.
that's correct. That's where the family livings are allowed.
What is R2? What is the minimum size in R2?
The minimum size in R2 would be 2 acres. So you could do, I think I put there, it's, in R2 and RU district, both new family parcels and resident parcel must be at least 2 acres. So you'd have to have 4 acres in order to do,
Well, no, 3 for the
No,
parent.
3, you have to have
so you'd
5,
have to have 5.
well, and R2 and RU are different. Because they're smaller lot size.
Roger that.
Well, you really don't need it in R2. I mean, they don't need to do a family exemption in R2.
Unless you had 4 acres.
Well, I mean, there are a pretty good number of parcels that are two, there actually are 4 acres.
Historically, wasn't it 4 acres? If you had as much as 4 acres, you could divide it.
In R2.
No, well, on the
Two and two.
It wasn't A1, it is, whatever it is. If you had 4.
Oh, you're going way, way
Historically,
back.
I'm
You're
back.
going like prior to like 98.
Okay,
Yes.
because I don't know
Well,
where.
you could go down to 1 and 1. I mean, if you went back far enough, it was 1 acre minimum. Yeah. You could do a 1 acre single cut, you could do a 1 acre family division, and you only had to have the same lot size minimum left over.
I didn't think it was 3 and 2 had been in there too long,
No.
but I was of the opinion that you could get as much as 4 acres, you could cut it to 2 and 2. But on the holding of the original parent parcel, I don't know why you need a holding time. Suppose that parent wants to give it to another child. You know, you're the second child and he moves on. So he may not want to wait 3 years or 5 years to pass it to a second child. So I don't know, why would you need a 5-year holding period if it's a family exemption?
In R2, if the minimum size is 2 acres and you have 4, why would that be a family subdivision?
If you're in R2,
Why didn't it just split into 2 acre parcels?
Well, family subdivisions have other benefits like the values and things, right?
Well, that, and you don't have to go back before the planning commission. If you're re-subdividing to just sell outside of the family, you would have to go back through hearings and subdivision plat approval and et cetera, correct?
Right, I think it's a good question. I mean, if you had 4 acres and, you know, you have the lot width and everything, it probably, yeah, I think you're probably right. You could
I
probably
think
just
it's,
do
I
a
think
by
it's
right
right.
subdivision.
Yeah, I wouldn't see why there would need to be.
I mean, the far majority of these are in A10. Yeah, I mean, that, you know, that is
Well-
sort of the.
Well, most of your rezonings are tied to number of lots and things like that. So I mean, I would disagree. We're talking about an R2 lot
Right.
that's sitting out there that's already gone through a rezoning and been platted, and it's 4 acres. And somebody wants to come in and split that again, not family exemption, just split it and sell it as 2 separate lots. You would have to go back through the subdivision
Yeah.
plat approval
You'd have
process.
to bring in a survey and all, you know, all that.
But that doesn't
approve, but that would be.
involve anybody but planning.
Right,
No,
right.
what- Unless lot sizes are, I mean, again, unless lots, like, any rezonings that I've seen or that I can remember of are tied to a number of lots. Correct?
Which is going to be direct size to the size of the lot. I mean, if you give us, 6 acre R2 lot, you want to divide it into 3, you know.
Right, but this has already been rezoned, and I, in my proffers was 72 lots. And now 10 years down the road, 30 years down the road, somebody comes in and says, I want to make lot number 73, that's got to go back through the subdivision approval.
Right, right. I mean, if it was a rezoning, you proffered 72 lots, then you have to go back. Right, right.
Okay, I'd go back and look, I think the majority of what I can remember from planning always had a maximum number of lots in rezonings. That's something the county's been pretty strict on for years.
Well, even if it's a subdivision plat, you can't just take a platted lot and say it's 2 lots. You have to plat it.
Right, they'd have to do a, what's the surveyor term? I can't think, re-subdivision, right? They'd have to do a re-subdivision plat.
Requirements for a family subdivision and just a
Right.
normal subdivision are different, so I can't say there's a big difference, but see.
No, I think you're right, you'd have to replat it as a subdivision.
Right.
So they,
Well, I don't see why that would, why would that force it any further than the planning?
Because of the number of lots that you agreed to in the rezoning.
The original zoning
The original rezoning case
carries all.
that I can remember always has a lot total tied to it. That's been a standard zoning practice for 30 years, 40
So
years.
it's the case right now, I'm just asking. So it's the case right now that any, let's just say, for argument's sake, a 40-acre piece of land right now that's already been zoned R2, but has not had any development improvement on it. If they came back and wanted to, so So you're saying at that point, they had, in order to get the rezoning to R2, they had to have a plat?
There's a,
Within
no, they didn't have to have a plat necessarily. They had to probably have some kind of preliminary drawing. But in writing, they said 20 lots out of that 40. They said 18 lots out of that 40 acres. That they've agreed to something in that rezoning that maximized the number of lots.
Nobody saw that request except plan.
No, that goes all the way through the
zoning
zoning.
case.
That's a zoning case. That had 2 hearings at planning, 2 hearings at.
Oh, I mean, if you,
I want to make sure we're talking about, we're going
oh,
down
yeah,
the
okay,
rabbit hole
right,
here.
no, I see what you're saying. So,
And then
you're right,
once
they had to get it
approved,
converted
then
to
it
an
turns into
R2,
a
to
subdivision.
R2 from an A10, so at that point.
When they went from A10 to R2, they agreed to this X amount of acres, and in that same proffer is gonna be a maximum number of lots.
Yep.
That's been standard zoning practice for 30 years plus.
I totally get it.
So, if they came in and they had not met that, let's say then they came out and did the subdivision and they only did, 59 out of the 60 lots. And then this case comes up later and somebody wants to re-subdivide, then they could, because they haven't changed an original proffer. But if they're going back on a proffered zoning from 20, 30 years ago and they want to change it, they have to go back through that same process to get more lots.
Yep, okay.
And I don't know many developers that didn't get the maximum on lots that they could when they first did the subdivision.
Okay,
Yeah.
So the question I was gonna raise is, again, we're talking about A10, R2, and RU. What about RR?
And what about R5?
R5.
Because that's what I was just thinking. Yeah. Why are they not?
Why would you be able to do a family subdivision on R2? and not be able to do it on R5?
I mean, I think those are the only ones that's available. Check.
I think you're right.
Yeah, those aren't, I mean, you can free to check me, but I think that's why those are on there, because those are the districts that family subdivisions.
Guess the question is why? Why not RR and R5?
Yeah,
Is there something
I
different?
really, yeah, I mean, RR, you know, yeah, it's a A10, RR, R2, RU. So those are the 4 districts.
RR is a.
Yeah, RR, yes.
So why aren't they mentioned?
So it's just R5 that's not.
I'm sorry, I did not put RR in there. I did not, okay. I put A10, R2, RU, RR.
The question still stands, why?
R5, why is not R5?
Family
None of it.
subdivision.
What's the linkage? What is the minimum linkage in RR?
10 acres.
10 was the minimum.
Didn't do there anyway.
I would say it's a good idea. Keeping the family together.
Yeah, I'm good with it.
And I don't know how we can go against the family trying to do that.
And we used to have a 10. We had a 10-year requirement.
Right.
Yeah, that was on there for quite a few years, and then we went back to the 5.
So the 5 on both sides sounds like a,
Yes, sir.
okay.
I don't think you'll hit the 5 on the residual parts, the parent parts. Next week, you may, I might give one to Peter this week and Paul next week.
But if it enters into a family division, I think it still qualifies. Like if
Oh, okay.
if it's going into another family division situation, I think it's fine. It qualifies under the current rules. If you try to sell it the day after you gave the other piece to your son,
That's right.
that's when it triggers the hold.
Okay.
It just wouldn't be eligible for sale or transfer to somebody outside the family.
Outside of immediate family.
Okay.
So,
Keep in mind, the banks will foreclose and take it next week anyway.
That's right. And that's a hardship case that, in the past, the planning commissioner or planning director could sign off on something like that. But if there was any other, outside of a judge, taking kind of thing, then, they had to come before the board of supervisors and ask for a hardship. And I remember one of those in history, so. And it's not like it happens every other day.
just to clarify what we just said. The minimum is 5 acres to do a family division. 2 and 3, is that what you're saying?
That's an A,
In 810.
that's only an A10.
Only 8.
In the other examples, it's basically the 2 and 2, which is what Doug was talking about.
What will it be in R5?
I would think 3-2, right?
Right, because
That's
that's
just logical.
Yeah, RR is 5-3. So A10, RR, 5-3 right now. R2, RU is 2-2. 2 and 2.
There'll be two sets of rules.
Right.
One set for R2 and RU and
Yeah, I
one
don't
set.
think that's not really proposed to be changed.
Right,
I think-
okay.
I think there's probably some questions of, but
Yeah.
far majority are going to be 8. That's 95%.
So A10, RR, and R5 would be 3-2. And R2 and RU would be 2-2. If we recommended that,
Now, R5 is not on the,
if we recommended.
right, okay, yeah, if you want to recommend R5 be one as well, right?
So the question was, why is R5 not in there? Is there a reason?
Did R5 exist when this part of it was,
That's the most likely reason, right?
that's my guess.
It just wasn't around. So,
If you're going to include R2, why wouldn't you include?
R5.
So unless, Ligon, in your research, you come up with a valid reason, I think use R5.
Include R5.
And we include,
That we should include.
again, the frequency, so
Yeah.
Yeah.
chance of it happening is pretty.
Well, it's also a little bit like, correct me if I'm wrong, R5 allowed ADUs as did A10, but RR10 did not,
we'll get into that next, yeah.
which was, I think that's been changed already.
Yeah.
So
I think that was
the
Yeah,
change-
There was an accessory line.
It's, was it RR5?
R10.
R10.
Come on in. So the change would be to go from 8.5 to 3.2 for A10 RR, to use the same smaller lot sizes for R5, and then to go to 2.2 for RU and R2. That's what I heard.
All for family division.
All family division.
All family division, add the parent tract with 5-year hold, just to make sure it's family matter, and add appeals to the board for hardships, I think I heard.
And the new track. It's 5 years.
Right, both the new and the new already is, I think,
Yeah.
All right.
and prevent rentals, I wrote down. Did you say that?
Yeah, that's already in there.
That's already, yeah.
That's already.
Okay.
Can I ask one more question about that, that whole discussion? What's the problem we're fixing? If the goal is to improve housing stock, what does this fix?
It's just,
More options.
Yeah, this is more
I kind
options
of know, I
for
just thought. it
the
was-
family member to be able to stay in the, I mean, this is the one place where you can directly affect the family member being able to afford to live in the family.
Right.
You know, my kid came to school here, blah, 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 now they can't afford to live here. Well, they can if you have, you know, a
You gave them a
situation
lot,
where you
they
can
got a
split
free
them.
lot, yeah.
Yep.
So I have a big enough lot where I can do a family subdivision. I have direct family members that I want to subdivide land off to own property, which they may then choose to build a house on and live in. And then that improves housing because
Access.
our family members can live immediately next to us on land they own, build a life for themselves on that, and it's a smaller lot. It used to be 8.5, and now we're gonna do 3.2 or 2.2.
Right, I mean, it's a recommendation. I mean, but that's sort of I think you have answered the question very well.
I think
So if you have more than one kid, it pulls more into that potential.
And it's essentially
I mean, I don't know
creating
the top-
lot minimum
top of the head.
subdivisions too.
Right.
Which is,
Easily 20 to 30.
Well, I think that, as time goes on with that picture, what you'd expect at the end of the 5 years or at some point in time, they would get out of the family, and probably be sold as an individual lot. But, and you may have data, I'm sure you do have data on this, but probably the case is, let's say if I was building, you were building another house, or you allow another house on your property for an offspring, but it doesn't matter whether it's a parent or a child, then the chances are probably pretty good that there's less house going to be built there than there was at the main house. Not a restriction, or it's not one, but I think that's very likely, especially when you bring in a younger person or even an elderly. In which case, that once it does leave the family, it puts another smaller home, right, with ownership
Just apply. Yeah.
on the market.
Right.
That you didn't have before. So I mean, it actually does end up, it's not a lot, 5 years is a lot for me. But it's not a lot for, the standpoint, taking into account.
Smaller homes, smaller lot, in that scenario, less taxes,
Yes,
family member pays it, original owner, if they're an older couple, want to cut down on their taxes or whatever, they own less property, less taxes. Everybody wins.
Well, actually,
so that might be too
A little
small.
actually, if you look at I think some of the assessments anyway, regardless of the size, 1 acre is assessed at 1.5. Acres are assessed at others. 70 on the first acre and 10 on the other acre. So by doing what you're talking about here, you potentially now have two $70,000 acres or 2 parcels on that original, and the remainders are 10. So you've actually elevated the tax
Okay.
revenue basis by $60,000.
Yeah, although,
Plus the residential.
Because it's a building lot.
yeah, but we don't want to forget, and that's necessarily true. And, but on the other hand, you want to fail to recognize that people will be living in the house and they will require services. And if they got small children, they will be going to the school system for a good number of years. So you will be shouldering those costs, which probably is that drain. But regardless, it definitely contributes to this housing diversity, we've been talking about. And maybe in a less objection way than some things might. And it's pretty direct.
I'm good.
You help the affordable home marketing base though. Although it's got some bitterness with it. But that was one of our responsibilities, I think.
All right, so I think we've got 8 more topics to go, so. 40 minutes on that one.
Nice work.
I thought it'd be about 5, but I was joking. So I think I heard, I want to write this up in a, in a report, so y'all will get your eyes on that. So if there's something that I've written wrong, or I didn't feel like we had consensus, we'll have a chance to comment on that, so.
I would put a break on that a little bit, looking for what it is or what it is you're trying to characterize. I think that, maybe possibly that you want members of the committee to write some of that out, make sure that the nuances and, what exactly you said, and ultimately the whole committee has got to agree with what's there. But I think that may be a little bit more efficient and accurate to the discussion. Nothing that we talked about here, but in other areas that are, more intricate, that may be the case.
Yeah. All right, I'll go on to the next one with accessory dwellings, and we'll try to, on this one, allowable A10, we see RR, R5, R2, and in RU, it's just an apartment. It's a discussion. I think as I said before, that we have a pretty permissive, allowable ADU ordinance. Few items that I think would be good to consider. It's that sometimes, I know in A10 RR, you can be 50% of the main dwelling. The only reason I put this as a CUP is that sometimes you just find that for whatever reason, if you allow, you have a 2,000 square foot house, somebody comes in with an ADU that they want to build and it's 1,050. I mean, I'm not saying 1,500, but sometimes they might be a little bit over what's allowable. I was just sort of, if I was going to reform things, make it, maybe have a little more flexibility, I would say that, the same thing in R5, R2, and RU is if you did exceed the 50 or 35%, you could just simply state your case in a C. And again, just in my experience in a year, I've known several people come in that are really interested. The 35%, if it could literally be 44%, and it would fit nicely on the lot, with the way the lot lays out. Right now, it's just a hard no. I think it would kind of provide a little flexibility saying, I'm not going to administratively approve it, but we're going to take this. It's pretty reasonable. It says 35%, but, you've got a fairly large lot. It looks like it sits really nice. Instead of being 700 square feet, you're 830 square feet, or whatever it may be. So that was my rationale for just sort of getting some comments on that.
So, didn't we coalesce on that there's no reason why they shouldn't go to 50%? That both of them should be 50%?
I think,
Yeah. Okay, then that probably, for the R5, R2, RU, then that sort of would solve that. I think that would,
I'm good with what you proposed, change it all to 50%, and then if they want to go over 50%, they have to have a conditional use permit and tell us why.
okay.
we actually voted on it, voted to do it,
Yeah.
what about you saying?
I have one other thought to that. So in looking at, I don't know what percentage of the homes in the county fall above or below a certain square footage level, but would it be beneficial if we had that it was just by right up to a certain square foot for an ADU? So say someone has 1,000-foot home or an 800 square foot home currently, and even if we're giving them 50% and it's 400 square feet for an ADU, that's tiny house living at its finest, but it may not be necessarily consistent with what the ADU is intended to do. And I'm just wondering, so would having a permitted by right up to 500 square feet, regardless of main dwelling size, or whatever that is, just to make it a livable space for someone as opposed to out of desperation and not wanting to go through the process, I have to stay under this because that's what
I mean, to require it to be over the 50% to have the, the CUP, but with that proviso that, as Chris says, that, with some minimum, it was 500, less. I mean, you go to that by right, I don't see what that claims. I certainly agree with what he's saying. It's just, at some point, it becomes really impractical to have a 400 square foot.
Well, if there's 1,000 square foot house and they want to do 1,000 square foot house, they just have to get a CUP.
Yes.
But what you're,
That's not what I'm talking about.
You're talking about
No.
less than.
He's talking about if they want
I'm
to take.
talking about putting a threshold to say that, okay, it doesn't really matter if the main dwelling unit is 850 square feet. We'll allow you by right to do up to 500 feet.
And it has to be a minimum of 320 per HUD standard, correct? Like it can't be considered a livable space if it's below. a certain-
320 is what.
Right, so basically that's the magic number that you're talking about, ignoring whatever size the main dwelling is. If they build something between 320 and X, it's just by right. They don't have to come.
Right.
My point was if it's more than 50% of the home and it's a CUP and it's a small house, then that would probably have a good shot at getting approved.
I was just looking at, if you're talking about someone that's trying to build an ADU, and you're then putting them through the CUP process and paying the fees, where obviously someone that in most cases looking to do an ADU, money's an issue, and you're trying to economize on what you're doing with your lifestyle. So I was thinking of just from that side of things to alleviate that and make the process easier. On the bottom side.
Can they do more than 100% by CUP?
Yes. No, you can always double. So the current way that it was explained to me is that you can make the one that's there first become the ADU. So if I've got the 800 square foot, I could build another house at 1,600 square foot. And now the 800 becomes the
Inferior
ADU.
one, that becomes the.
That is the way it's being interpreted currently in
Right.
most zoning
And-
places.
I mean, it's not uncommon, but what Chris is talking about, have something
Right.
like that, or say it can be up to 1,000 or half the square footage, whatever is less. I mean,
Right.
every place does it. I mean,
And would that require a CUP in that case?
well, I mean, not
That would be
necessarily,
about right.
I mean, just by right. I mean,
I like that.
That's by right.
right, I mean, so I sort of, you know, to me, the 50, if you're saying 50% across the board, I think that's great, you know, but I do think adding the CUP would be a great benefit for those one or two that give people a little flexibility.
If they want to be 60 or 70?
Right, we want to do a little bit larger, that makes sense, it fits on the lot, you're buffered, no problem. I think what Chris is saying, also, I mean, that's a fine thing to also add. I mean, I don't see any harm. I think it's a very rare scenario, honestly. I mean, most people who are building ADUs, or, you know, a second house on a lot that, you know, you can't divide it off, you can't, you know, you use it as cash and carry kind of situation most of the time. I don't really see that being a big, something that happens a lot, but there's nothing wrong with putting it in there in case it does.
Right, just to clarify, so, in taking your example, there, you started in, had an 800 square foot house on the plot at present. And then you built, you want to build a larger one. As the second one, you couldn't right now build one that would say 1,200, right? Because you would, you know what I'm saying, because at that point, 800 is more than 50%.
Right.
Right.
So you gotta watch that. So 1,600, you got it, okay? Or more than 1,600, you're okay.
Right.
It can't be anything smaller than that.
Right. But you'd have to start at the 500. What his example is that it would be the 500. If you were 500 or less currently, is the only scenario that you're describing, where the other house could be bigger with something by.
Yeah, right, well, there's that.
Right.
Yeah.
Chris's example, you would not need a CUP to do a 500 square foot accessory dwelling.
Correct.
Yeah, I sort of like that, up to 500. So if you had a 900 square foot house, you would get at least, you know, so does that sound like a nod, head nod from everybody? Okay. Up to 500 is by right.
And again, you know, if you're keeping a list, that's another one that adds to the, you know what I'm saying, to the tenant, you know, affordability.
Yeah, absolutely.
Diversity of housing.
I mean, when you look at any kind of search on affordability, housing, and maybe we just aren't that creative, but that's like the first thing that comes up almost everywhere is ADU, you know, ADU. I do think they work well, and I think a lot of people in Powhatan, and again, when I came here and saw that, you know, for this ordinance, I was happy that we had to have that battle. I was like, good, that was good. So I think those are great reforms as far as,
Can I ask a question? This thing where you have a 1,000 square foot house and you use ADU to build a 2,000 square foot house, that does not strike me as attainable housing. It strikes me as somebody trying to kind of game the system. Am I missing, what's the?
yeah, I don't think it really would be, but I mean, I don't think it happens very often.
Can we put a CUP requirement on that scenario though, in the?
Sure.
I mean, does that make
What's the
sense?
scenario?
Why would that matter? Somebody wanting to,
Because if you're in a neighborhood with 2,000 square foot houses and your neighbor decides to build a 4,000 square foot house on the same piece of property, they already have a 2,000 square foot house on because they won the lottery, you're going to want the staff to look at it as a CUP. I mean, it doesn't go towards the housing goal that we're
No,
trying
it doesn't do
to
that.
address.
well, this is what you're talking about now, is a CAB.
Right, but this idea that you can flip it and do a house that's twice as big as your existing house on the same parcel, it seems like you want the staff to look at that. If there's a reason it is by right, you know, I'm not sure following that,
But that would trigger a
it would trigger a CUP.
sure, because you're doubling it, so.
No, we're saying you could flip
No,
it.
not the way they enforce it now.
Yeah, they're saying you could flip it, Chris. That's why I call mine.
Like we have the scenario where they go in and they build a garage with the house above it, bachelor pad in it, and then they get married and start having kids, and they add on, you know, a house part or even a separate dwelling. And that square footage that is a full living space, bathroom, kitchen, he lived in it for 10 years, right, now becomes an ADU. Because they're, as long as the second part that they build was twice as big as the first part, is exactly the way it was explained to me in planning.
But if we're adding CUP to go more than 50%, I don't see a problem with adding CUP to that scenario.
But this wouldn't be necessarily more than 50%. 1,000 square foot existing house, if you build a 2,000 square foot house, you've got 1,000 square foot.
But you wouldn't be able to do it by right because there's a stipulation that you can't build a new structure that's larger than the existing structure without a CUP. That's what I'm suggesting.
I thought that wasn't sure. That's not what it's being taught now, I don't.
I'm not sure.
That's not the way it's being.
Yeah, I mean,
You could do that right now, is what I'm telling you.
Yeah.
You're adding a rule to prevent something that is happening right now, has nothing to do with. Oh, okay.
I mean, I think what I would suggest is we're doing recommendations, or, you know, if this is something to consider. I mean, I think that's a, you know, when I found out you could do that, I was like, oh, okay. That's, you know, I was a little surprised, but it's probably a little unusual that, you know, you could double it and call one, but that's the way it's been interpreted, no problem, but I don't think there's any, if we're doing a recommendation, I don't think there's any reason to exclude that this is something that the board might want to consider.
You have a floor on the square footage for a small house, you could have a ceiling or something you're talking
Yeah,
about.
that would do it.
Anything over 3,000 or something.
Right.
That way too.
Right,
I just think you can't anticipate all the cases that would flip like that. It just seems like that's one the staff could just look at. It's going to be pretty rare.
Is this limited to a certain zone and a certain parcel size?
Now, the idea would be when you use the ADU approach to do 2 homes on one piece of property.
Yeah.
If the new home is not smaller than the original home, it doesn't meet the strategic goal of attainable housing, which is what we're here trying to figure out. So it gives me pause not to also add a CUP requirement. We're already adding it, you know, for the case of allowing more than 50%. So 50, 60, 70, 80, 150, 200. I mean, any one of those are going to be CUP anyway. So if you flip it, but you make the math work, like why not have that be a CUP? It's almost the same thing.
You can do it, I mean, it's this idea that you,
If you want to go above.
this isn't bad. It's
You have the
consistent.
ceilings, you have the ceilings in
Yeah,
it.
that, so you weren't really trying, so if you had a 1,000 footer already in place and you want to build a 2,000 footer, you know, we don't really thinking that that's a problem, you know, I don't think. Now, on the other hand, you're saying, I get that, I mean, because that's still in the affordability umbrella. But if you started with a 2,000, or got every 2,500 square foot and you decide I'm gonna build a 4,000 or a 5,000, well, now I've got 2 pieces on there, one of them is 4,000 square feet, and the other one's 2,000 or more and more. I mean, it doesn't look much at all anymore like affordability issues. So, I mean, it makes sense, but that would do it, putting the cap on the rent. That would do it. Would that,
Well, yeah, I think Lincoln's idea is to keep it a little bit open-ended, so we'll maybe work up, if there's no disagreement on this, you know, do some sort of a.
Yeah, I think for a recommendation, just to say this is an idea that was explored, something to consider. I think it's well worth considering, but I, you know, don't get a lot of heartburn either way by it, but if we're going to move this, we probably should go on to the next thing. I think I've got enough, because I'm going to write this up, so I think, you know, we've got enough, I've got enough to put something for these first 2, where there's some consensus, let's all look at it. So, then, all right, we go to number 3?
Yep.
Before we move on, my preference would be to not rush through these things and to meet more frequently so that we can have a thorough discussion. I know that may not be the entire group's preference, but that's, I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, I do think we're definitely going to have to meet at least one more time, so I don't know.
Well, we've got a meeting scheduled for the 15th.
Oh, we did?
Oh, we did?
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
I thought for some
Oh,
reason we
okay.
had- this was the last one that was on the website, but that's even better.
I thought we had the 15th in our original.
I
That
think
was
you
like the
are
last
right, yeah.
one, the last date that
Before
we
the
could
meeting.
meet before the meeting.
Okay.
Did we set up another meeting?
Sir?
Did we set up another meeting after this one?
Well, I think that's what we had talked about was the 15th and just saying that we would only do it if we needed it.
Okay.
But, I mean, it's
So
obvious.
I don't, I mean,
No.
yeah, I mean, that's next week.
Is that,
I'm
yeah.
gonna be in Connecticut next week before the regulars.
Pretty quick. But we never scheduled
I don't
it,
think
we
we
just talked about
scheduled
it.
it.
Right. I had it on my calendar with a question mark because that was the if we needed it. But in my mind, I think I said in January, you're going to need it.
Well, you know, I mean, as we've said before,
But if you don't do it the 15th, you're not going to get it done before the,
Excuse me.
I mean, you know, we've talked about that before, trying to press this into an uncomfortable time frame on the housing, especially since they drug their feet all the way to February before they
Absolutely.
even get. So, I mean, now, I think it's fair to say that the economic development side of it pretty well nailed down. I haven't heard any more disagreement on that. That could be presented, and Roxanne, I think, has already largely written that up. I haven't seen it, but I think it's already.
Yeah,
I mean, you could give them that and say, you know, we're working on the house, and we got more work to do. That's all there is, and, you know, that's that. And they're not,
Yeah, I think we just need to go, just keep working through these and, my preference would be to kind of present it all at once.
give them something, I don't see a problem giving them something.
Sure, I mean,
If it's done, and it shows them what we've been,
right,
you know, working productively, I don't have a problem with that. And I think from the standpoint of deadlines in here anyway, they've got here the time frame. So they're talking about the time frame for the strategic priority 3, housing residential options. And the time thing they give here for the recommendation of the Citizens Working Group is mid-2025. Now, that doesn't mean April. April is in the end of the first quarter. You know what I'm saying?
yeah, I mean, I really
That
think.
could be May, easy.
Yeah, I think the May meeting, as far as, my workload, trying to figure out when I can put together a good report that y'all all shake your heads at. I think it's probably fair to say that the May board meeting would be probably about right.
so where did we get the April meeting from? Because I thought that
They
was in
clearly said
there.
April.
I think we
Yeah,
had.
Either they didn't make it in writing, but I clearly, from the
Clearly.
beginning of this thing, agreed to have a report to them by their April board meeting. And maybe that was in
Well, yeah,
phone
it was written
calls
somewhere.
or whether that was what, but that was what they had put out.
But you know,
But I'm fine with both of your discussion, we're not gonna make that, I think we said that in the beginning. So,
it may come in, it might have come in versus that we originally had April 1 and April 15th. And then we moved that back to April 8th or April 1, I think. we originally-
no, but those were all based on reporting back to the board by the April 28th board meeting.
Yes.
Which means it has to be to the secretary, to the, what do we call them now, we don't call them secretary, the admin person, the week before in order to make it to that packet, which meant our last meeting had to be the 15th.
Yeah, we backed into everything.
Well, but yeah, and regardless, I think it's still, the reality is, that's not a realistic deadline for all the stuff we've got to come through.
Concur.
And as far as your own workload, Ligon, I mean, there are members of the committee that are certainly willing
Yeah,
to
sure.
write the thing, and whatever it does, once it drafts out, everybody's gonna look at it anyway, so.
Yeah, no, I think it definitely would be an open source document, but more than welcome people to help out with, putting thoughts together, so.
Original's good.
Conservation subject.
Okay, conservation subdivisions, a lot of talk on this one. I think, we know, we've had conversations that we've had this in the ordinance, I take it for at least some time, decade or more. The bonuses right now, the 20 and 25%, I just used the A10 as a good example, 100 acres by right. You could do 10 acres with the conservation bonus. You could do an extra, I think I put here, you could do an extra with 60% of the land preserved open space, 20% density bonus would give you 4 additional lots. I put 24, but it should be 14 lots. And with a 70% preserved would be 15 lots. I'm sorry about that.
No, you're right, you did 200 acres, right?
Oh, I said I put 200. Oh, I did put 200 acre tract. Okay, excuse me. So I was right. But just do the math at the 100 acre lot. You know, you do the 0.2, the 0.25 at 100 acres. You get a couple extra lots. The advantage is obviously you can do smaller. You can do as small as 40,000 square feet. You can do larger than that if you want. But you know, I think the question is, you know, what the board has kind of considered is, you know, one, do we keep these by right? I think that's a fair question, and I think I asked some of my questions. Do you keep the current, even though they're relatively small bonuses, do you keep them by right? Do you potentially also add, you know, the board at one time had looked at adding larger bonuses of 60, 70%, so that the 100 acres where you could do 2 extra lots, either do 16 or 18 lots, provided a 60 or an 80% bonus if you preserve 60 or 70% of the land. So the question, I think, you know, before us is, you know, the current regulations, which again are relatively small bonuses. I mean, you know, are they appropriate? You know, does the conservation subdivision, and I know I've shown some laid out, some things like that, how they could look. You know, does it help strike a balance in the rural housing and also land conservation? And also, you know, would it be better to throw all of them into CUPs? And how about allowing a larger density bonus? You know, again, if the board had discussed 70%, 80% bonus if you preserve 60 or 70% of the open space. You know, kind of open the floor up, and you know, my feeling is the board seems to be interested in the conservation subdivision being applied, and would like to see, at least, you know, I think some of the board members, an increased bonus, you know, from 2025 maybe 60 to 70, but again, putting it in that CUP.
We help them understand, I guess my understanding, my thinking about conservation easements or lot size averaging, the term we used 10 years ago anyway. If you have the 100 acre parcel, and the minimum for that 100 acres is 10 lots. But then you choose to go to a conservation easement or a conservation ordinance subdivision, you could go down to 2 acres per lot. And let's say you could do 20 2-acre lots. That's 40 acres. Leave 60% of that 100 acres open, undeveloped. So that's a double. That's 100% increase in the number of housing units you get, going from 10 to 20, right?
The way they figured it,
Don't have the way it is now.
No.
no,
So it's just an increase from the 10 parcels to something.
It's 10 plus whatever the bonus equates to.
So if it's 70%, that's 7 more lots.
Right. So if it's 70%, 20% bonus, 25% bonus.
So they took it away from being the lot averaging acreage intensity
Yeah.
to just a set number of lots based on the parent tract size. That's really, so it really cut down,
Yeah.
cut the knees out from
Yeah.
what we used to be able to do.
Yeah, I mean, as he says, you've got a basic .1, dwelling unit per acre. So when they say there's a, let's say, as in the case of the second table, suppose there was a 15% bonus. Well, instead of .1, it would be .115, per acre. So that's a 15. And 85% would mean, literally that you'd be .185 per, per acre. So they apply that, multiply by 10, they'll tell you what you're getting, but that's the way they actually figure it, what the bonus is. I got an email yesterday from Darlene Bowen, and she asked me to copy it up, distribute it to the committee. Darlene, as you probably know, or you may or may not know, Darlene is the sitting planning commissioner for District 2. And, of course, it was the planning commission that originally asked us to dive back in here and provide some guidance on this question. But I think it's worth reading. She's got two things. She got other things on general housing, but we're not talking about that at the moment. So maybe it's more just a question of that first large paragraph where she's making some points about conservation subdivisions. And she says here, please distribute email. I'd like to propose a few suggestions for reviewing them. And she says, as you know, developers are targeting Cobham for the next area of development because of close proximity. The Richmond conservation subdivisions lend appeal to developers, especially now that higher density bonuses are in the works. Many of the parcels of land that qualify are on the back roads, which are not conducive to heavier traffic, and have farms in which wells are now being used as primary source for water for the farm. For homes, she says, more homes mean more drains in the water supply, and I want to use Petersburg Road as an example. Far eastern part of the county, from Genito, 2 miles towards Sheffield, there are 8 farms alone that qualify for conservation subdivision. Our roads, I believe, has one of the most continuous farmland in the county. I'd like to propose that the minimum 50-acre minimum, the current 50-acre minimum that's in the ordinance, it's actually 40 acres. Fine, well, basically comes 50. I don't think there's ever been a 40 any other than 50-acre lease. 50-acre minimum would be changed to 100. That would eliminate at least 4 to 5 of the parcels on our road to qualify. We are almost all families here on our road, and there are other family farms on other rural roads too. I would also like to see a 500-foot setback from public streets and 300-foot setback from neighboring agricultural zone land. The buffer should be increased around streams, ponds, and wetlands. I also believe the conservation subdivision should have to be approved using a CUP. Please take these development threats seriously, and let's make our decisions rule in favor of allowing developers to start contacting our landowners and enticing them to sell. That is a threat. More of us older farmers are dying out, and the younger generation is not as attached to the farms as we are. And so that's her comments on that. I would note that the current ordinance requires a 300-foot setback from a county road, rural connector anyway. So she's suggesting, Joe, what she's really talking about here is moving from 300 to 500, but then also adding then this statement about trying to give a buffer to an existing farm. You don't say that's contiguous to the parcel under consideration. So I told her I'd pass that on reading, and that's just some things to think about. This is a complex subject, and the board is going to be somewhat unlike the other strategies we've looked at and what they're asking. In strategy 6, where it talks about preserving the land, and among the things that it suggests here and is asking the CWG paid attention to was a review of buffer requirements for comprehensive plan and ordinances to achieve a greater protection of the highest priority resources and greater flexibility for lower priority resources rather than a one-size-fits-all buffer plan. Understand that pretty well. I think it's fairly safe to say that, as it was mentioned before, the experience we had on the Hidden Springs case was definitely one for a lot of people and of course some heartburn as far as the board was concerned, and I think that's one of the reasons that you see this requirement in here in number 6, that you're not just a comprehensive plan, but how the ordinances look in this regard in terms of providing buffer protection. The proposal that you've got here, other than this largely stays with what currently is the case, suggests going to a CUP across the board on these. Gives somewhat higher densities that are 25, which is by right at the moment, runs that up to 30, and puts the 30% bonus and puts a middle value in there, 15, and then what you would get with no bonus, but just clustered. So these are a set of potential recommendations as requirements for conservation subdivisions, and I'm talking now about ordinance requirements. And number one, that all conservation subdivisions require a CUP. I think that's we can suggest that that's certainly a topic that's under a lot of discussion. It is no longer required by state law that we require any clustering in the county, period. That's by virtue of the fact that the state law on this subject only pertains to counties whose growth between the last 2 Daily censuses at or above 10%. Ours is 8.2% on the last one. We're not in this. And the projection by Weldon Cooper is we're not going to be it again when we get to 2030. So that's out of the picture. There's no longer any reason that if the county doesn't want to, that they have to do any clustering at all. And if they do want to do it, it's entirely up to them what terms they do it under. Those are important changes from what it would have been, some years ago.
So this was a solution at some point to a requirement, a state requirement.
It was consistent with the state requirement. They still have latitude as to what level bonuses they provide. There was a floor put on it and the need to have a clustering by right option under state code for these high growth counties. But that doesn't only apply to us.
My bigger question is, does this whole conservation subdivision work towards the subjects that we're trying to address around the table, affordable housing? I don't think anything that's coming across the county is in that neighborhood. So is this something that we should even be taking up as a group at this time? Not saying it doesn't
Right,
be
no.
addressed by the planning commission or the county
Right.
or something, but is it under our purview?
Yeah,
I don't think it was initially, but I think the planning commission sent it to us at 2 meetings ago or meeting before that.
So we can send it back.
so the
Or at
comprehensive
least
plan.
get our first part of our work done and then.
Right.
They want an answer
Yeah.
from us. So
Well, I think if you look at the comprehensive plan, if you search the terms conservation subdivision, but in the current plan, I think it's like mentioned 60 times or something.
How many
It's-
times?
It's like 50 or 60 times.
Oh,
It's
wow.
all through the comprehensive plan. I think from a big picture perspective, I think the question is, one, we know we don't have to do it statutorily from the state. Does this group say, and again, does it answer? I think that's a good question. I think the conservation subdivisions are still probably on that higher end of the price point. The question to me is, do we move all conservation subdivisions to CUP? And if we do that, right down to 25% bonus is what's allowable by right. If we move it to CUP, do we also contemplate potentially adding higher bonuses? Instead of that 100 acres going from, 10 lots to 12 lots, you can now get a CUP, maybe 17, or you get 18. Now, one of the things with that the conservation subdivision that sort of, I think, sort of knocks a lot of people out from considering it, is it does require a state maintained road. Now, you can maintain it privately, but it has to be built to state standard. So that's sort of, again, it drives the price up, people do it. It's not as something that, I think, if we just said, hey, it could be on a private road that's, maintained by, that it could just be built to, it could be a dirt road, gravel, ditched gravel, I think it'd be a lot different. But, the fact that it does require that, I think.
I think we'd be careful.
Right.
And the Hidden Springs was a case of that.
Right.
So what happened in the Hidden Springs case was they came in and they asked for one of these by rights. And they were going to put a private road in, not a state road, and they wanted to put a gate across. So the difficulty was from the standpoint of the county that, in order for them to put a gate across that, make it a gated community, it had to go one step beyond the planning office. Otherwise, by right would have been done at the planning office, and there's never been any information or going to the citizens or going to the planning commission or going to the board, they wouldn't know anything about it. But since they had to have a decision on whether they could put a gate on there, that meant it had to go to the. So the board got that, looked at the parcel, and made a lot of asked for suggestions about recommendations on buffering the parcel, and what could be asked about the development to make it a little bit more reasonable. And none of the priority conservation areas as identified in the plan, and which, for example, suggests there ought to be 200-foot buffers about a wetland in there. And, so the question is, could there be some headway made on that? And a lot of work was put into trying to suggest various ways in which some compromise could be raised and still get the building lots in, actually, and in the case at hand, that was refused on the part of the applicant, and he pushed it through. He pushed it through, and the board voted to let him have it. Might again, litigation issues that suggested.
They approved the private road.
But they approved the private road with the gate. With the gate.
Built to state standard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the minimum acreage currently we can have in a conservation subdivision?
50.
50, and this is proposing taking it to 100?
Is that what Darlene said?
That's just what's
That's good.
common.
That's one of the comments.
That's,
Oh, I had proposed, I think that's a fine idea.
no, you got a 50-acre example here on your spreadsheet. So currently it's 50 acres.
Correct.
How many of these have you had proposed?
We had the one recently, and I think before that, there's one other that has been applied.
I thought it was 3 total.
3 total. I mean, we've had it, I think it's been in the ordinance for at least since 2013.
Not many.
12 years.
10, 12 years. So, yeah, we haven't had many.
But do you have had some developed under this conservation system?
Right. I think 3.
3,
In the
and what
decade
time frame?
plus. I wasn't here, but I believe it was adopted in 2013.
2013?
Conservation.
So 5 years.
19. We've had at least 2 brought forward withdrawn as well.
We had a couple withdrawn, because they were trying to get the private road approved and,
But I mean, that went through. That was a
right.
300-acre parcel essentially.
So 3 in a dozen years, 3?
Is the minimum lot size 40,000?
You can do, a minimum could be 40, you can go above that.
Right, but minimum is 40.
Right. And I think one of the conversations we have at Planning Commission is maybe that could be increased as well. For some reason, 2 acres kind of has come up as a number that seems, they don't have to do 40,000, but that would be the minimum, of course. But again, I kind of go back to this group is not going to figure this all out right here, but it's from a concept, does it do you think the conservation subdivision one, is it something that is appropriate, Powhatan, to continue, even though we don't have to? And then, again, I just go back to my next point. If it were me, just me speaking, I would recommend, from working on the ordinance, moving it all to CU and adding the density bonus. Everything, you can do a higher density bonus, 2-acre minimum for the lots, and everything to CU.
Well, if you have had the 3 in 10 or 12 years, obviously something's drastically wrong. I mean, that creation currently doesn't work. So there's something wrong with it. I mean, we should have had more if this was a.
I got a better question. How many other rezonings have we had?
If it was feasible for whoever's doing this, and they were making money, they would have already done it.
Yeah, I think.
But I'm gonna disagree because I think, how many R2 zonings have we had in that many years?
Yeah, I
None. How many? You're comparing it to any, so the only other thing that's happened is 10-acre lots.
That's a political decision. The board hadn't wanted any. That's their decision. You've had plenty of requests, but none of them have come through.
So I can provide some anecdotal feedback on that for you.
Can I just make a comment? I agree with Matt, this has nothing to do with housing. I mean, that's summarizing what he said, but I totally agree. If you look at the 6 things that are listed in Ligon's report, they all make conservation subdivisions more difficult to do. We just agreed they're difficult to do already. I mean, I don't see where this has anything to do with housing. It might have to do with strategic priority number 6, which is protecting, environmentally sensitive lands, and we can certainly have that discussion, but I don't see anything in here that's going to make housing more attainable.
It increases housing stock.
Chris had the floor. Right, after Chris had the floor.
So what I was going to say about the conservation subdivisions is, within the last 5 years in particular, with the upward pressure on construction cost, there's been increased focus on conservation subdivisions. The reason being is being able to go to the smaller lot size, being able to reduce the extent of infrastructure for construction, and believe it or not, from a developer side, the ability to set aside environmentally sensitive areas, even though a lot of people disagree with that statement as a whole, that is a driver for a lot of developers, is to try and get that out of play so that it becomes a negotiating tool from the sale of the land, okay? So prior to that, when road construction was cheap, any subdivision doing a 10-acre split, cutting a road through, they could run a 3-mile road, build it, recoup the cost, and not have to worry about it. But the change in focus has happened because of construction costs. Now, what does it have to do with housing? I think it has a direct bearing on housing, to be honest. Housing affordability in terms of, if you look at, I'm going to use it because it's a dead project and it's a little sore spot for me because it died, but I'll get over it. Maybe better in the long run. But Schrader Road, the conservation subdivision. What was originally proposed on that was to take and that parcel is kind of divided in thirds. The front third of it is active farmland. The back 2/3 of it is forested. What the developer wanted to do was preserve the view shed in the farmland up front, which would have been greater than the 300-foot setback. Put a conservation subdivision in the back in the woods and increase the proposed buffers around the conservation subdivision to give more undisturbed land between the lots and the adjacent neighbors. So the affordability came into play because they were looking at the smaller lot sizes to be able to do this and to be able to help keep the price point lower. Now, I can't go into the affordability discussion about this. Their price point was going to be the mid-upper threes as an entry level. You guys can argue over affordability all day long after that. But there was realized real cost savings available on the table by doing the conservation subdivision this way for them to be able to fit the model with the home sizes. And they were not going for 3,000-foot home sizes either to be able to fit into this. It got a lot of pushback and ultimately they walked. But someone else has looked at it since. And last I knew, I think they walked also. And it has to do with some different reasons. It's not the fundamental structure of the conservation subdivision that is causing people to walk from it. It's other issues.
Mhm.
So,
I agree with you. I think that the concept is very good. It's a good concept, I think, but it's too restrictive. The bonus figures are way out of line with the economics of making it work. And all of these restrictions at the bottom, a lot of those could be combined into the conservation easement itself. There's no point, because DEQ wants, that you gotta have easements to them. You gotta have easements for streams or your creeks, and you gotta have setbacks and but all that, why don't all of this just be combined into one? They're all restricted areas that you can't really use. There's no point in them not being in the restricted easement of the conservation subdivision. And beyond that, there's a lot of stuff in there that's just pointless. There's no reason you could put your wells and drain fields within those easements. They're low maintenance areas and you could maintain them as yards or not. And the acreage could be pretty much anything you wanted it to be. The property owners could own the easement. It's still an easement. They can't do squat with it. But I think if this thing was massaged, it could work. But the bonus, the main thing is the additional cost that you're running into building state roads, especially if you're gonna go way back on the property to build it. But if you massage those figures, but these bonuses, you've gotta give better bonuses than this, Steve, for it to be a serious consideration from an economic viewpoint.
Yeah, that was the idea going to the 65 and 85.
Yeah, well, let's understand that the Hidden Springs case that went through, understand that the Hidden Springs case that went through requested a 20 to maybe under 25%, I think it was in the end, bonus. Certainly not anything over that, which was not even permitted because the last time they talked about the 85%, 70% bonus, they met tremendous opposition, which is the reason why it went back to the planning commission and they ultimately asked our view of it. But I mean, so he went ahead with that on the basis of that level of a bonus at 25%.
it was actually lower than that, but
Yeah,
just by lot yield, but.
Yeah, I think it came out on that, like 22% or something like that, Chris.
It was-
But in any case,
It's a,
but he was certainly willing to do it, did do it. It's gonna go in, now they're not gonna be cheap homes. He certainly means to have very nice homes into that subdivision with his gated communities, no doubt about that. But,
But the lots
say
are
it could be,
smaller.
huh?
But the
Yeah,
lots
it's
will be
smaller.
smaller.
the average lot
But
size.
still
is
within the picture. I think the bigger, so I think, can that be attractive? Yes. Is it, if you're asking about what people do in 2009, 10, 11, and 12, they were still pretty much trying to recover from the debacle that occurred in 2008, 2009. So there was not much pressure on a lot of areas for development later on into the teens. But anyway, obviously, it can be done and it can be then beneficial and there's times to change and Chris rightly indicates. I mean, there's a reason to think it could be attractive. And I'm not a proponent of doing away with them myself. I think they serve a purpose. Now, from the standpoint of the county, where you mostly find conservation subdivisions and their rationale, what they're for, is in the chapter on natural resources. And that's the only kind of subdivision that's to be considered, according to the comprehensive plan, in areas that are for example, within the priority conservation areas identified in the plan. That's the only one that's to be considered, is what the comprehensive plan says. So the question is, and then is, why did the county ever put conservation subdivisions in here in the first place, and especially make special language regarding the priority conservation areas? And the answer to that is that it was meant to protect our most sensitive natural resources, and at the same time, as a win-win, give a bonus to the developer that will allow them to concentrate with some clustering and have less infrastructure, as Chris says, and make good money off of the price. I mean, it's fun, it makes good sense. It's a question how far you want to go, how dangerous it is if you go to 85% or even 70%, whether on a big parcel, that can be a lot of houses. And you're back off, you're not in Route 60, you're out into the county, and the road infrastructure and the traffic that any significant number of sizable subdivisions that can have that. But you deal with a 400-acre parcel, 200-acre parcel, you get a lot of houses. And if they started, they said that, the road systems, the services are not in place to handle that, and just to rush into that could be a very big mistake. But going back to why it is that we had conservation subdivisions into the comprehensive plan, and it has this force, as Ligon suggests, that is meant to be applied as a means to protect our natural resources in these most sensitive areas. Well, so buffers are very important here. And I'm not talking about minimum DEQ buffers, because DEQ buffer, look, the priority conservation areas are built around what? Maintaining water quality, absolutely. They're also built around wildlife habitat, they're built around wildlife corridors, and meant to preserve these. That's the purpose. Now, you can't get a buffer of 100 feet, doesn't even begin to approach what's needed for a wildlife corridor, or any decent amount of wildlife habitat. That's well, and it's recognized, and that's why the comprehensive plan says, within the, not everywhere in the county, but within the priority conservation areas, those buffers need to be bigger. Now, one of the things that's mentioned here, regardless of what we go with, what you all want to go with, whether you just want to stop and say, all I want to say is everything needs to be CUP. You do that. The reason it says here, the reason, for example, it says here, it suggests that the calculated conservation area cannot exceed land, cannot include land within the county designated natural conservation areas, that is to say, unbuildable land under the current ordinances, is because the county gets no protection from putting that as part of the conserved land that you're putting up there. You can't build on that property anyway. It's already protected by ordinance. So the question is, when you come in with a proposal for a conservation subdivision and you ask, all right, so what's going to be conserved? What kind of land is important here to be conserved? If we give you this conservation subdivision, we're going to make headway in the goal of conserving our most sensitive natural resources. Well, at that point, if all you've got to point to, or most of what you've got to point to, is land that's already protected and conserved by law because you can't build in a floodplain, then you really have, you're basically asking to get a clustering bonus and to put in a higher density on a set of parcels. You see, that there was no other place to put your development. Now, if I've got a piece of property that's got some environment, let's take one along the Appomattox River. If I take a piece of property that's large, good sized, many of the parcels are along there, and one of those parcels has got some wetlands adjacent to the Appomattox River, as most of them do. All right, nothing's going to be built here. Now let's talk about the rest of the land where you're thinking about building a subdivision. If you want to give us a wider border, a wildlife protection area where the resources, the habitat is protected, we're willing to give you a density bonus, allow you to cluster it probably up near the road, etc. Makes perfectly good sense. It's kind of a win-win in that case. And it is a way to guarantee, it is a way to set aside land that is closer to the river and it's a better habitat for the wildlife than would be if you just open it up and let's say you had a by right 10-acre subdivision. Because if you get that, if they want to, there's nothing to stop them from putting the lands all the way right down on the road, give yourself a good view of the river, the whole 9 yards. Well, but the conservation subdivisions are a way to recognize both goals from the standpoint of the county. And for that reason, I personally don't think we are to throw out. I think they are a good thing. And now, is it take some convincing of the citizenry that they're good? Yes, it does. And that's a job. It has to be done. The county's got to sell that to people who don't look at that it's wrong to look at this and say, all right, all we got here is a giveaway to the developers. I've heard that from the mic at the public meetings, right? That's not it. That's not what this is. Now, could you end up in a situation where it's just a flat out, invitation to develop? You could, but you just need to manage the program. You just need to have the ordinance sufficiently defined so that you're going to get out of this what the intent of this originally was. And this is recognized here in strategic priority 6, where the board says review buffer requirements, the comprehensive plan and ordinances to achieve greater protection for the highest priority resources, greater flexibility for lower priority areas, rather than a one-size-fits-all. Now that's sensible. I get that. I totally get that. So in the priority conservation areas, in particular places in there, you would expect there's a logic to have wider buffers. You would expect more protection. But elsewhere in the county, maybe not as much, depending on where it was. So those are the kind of things that are in play here. Minimally, if you don't at least have these, whatever you do with them, if you don't at least have them all go before a CUP, you have given up completely your right to address whether they have helped the county, have harmed the county, have endangered the water quality. There's no check here. And the planning staff is not going to look or pay attention to the comprehensive plan on these unless it is backed up in the ordinances. And we have been told this point blank by the planning staff. So if you want to have more teeth in that, and I think that's why they asked us to look at the ordinances, you've got to give them the teeth. You've got to make some changes in the ordinances that make this a good program that we're comfortable with, we're happy about, we can defend and help the citizens. Well, anyway, that's kind of that's the long view, but there's a lot of history on this and a lot more that can be said about it, okay?
So I guess my first question would be, as far as moving, regardless of adding more density, with the group, feel like moving conservation subdivision to a CUP as a sort of a good thing, I think.
Yep.
And I'll just go to the second one, with increasing those densities, and I'll just use the 100 acres, right, Dale? You could do 100 acres, you could do 12 with the CUP. You could do 12 by right, conservation, 12 lots. If we would add, make it 65 or 85 bonus, you'd be talking about, there are 12, you could do 16. You could do 18 lots.
What was the bonus?
I'd say if you did a 65% or 85% bonus.
Okay.
So you take that 100 acres, instead of going 12, you go now 16 and 18. I guess we could make it 60 and 80.
Yeah.
The mechanics of that we can work out, but big picture, if that was also in the CUP, and things like buffers and all this, what Mr. Raleigh Dr. Raleigh was talking about, I totally agree. Those things we could work out, But how does the group sort of feel,
So I just want to clarify, so there's something in your packet that we got, but that does not match what was just passed around.
The only thing that was passed around is I'm not suggesting we have to go to that. I added to that what Darlene had asked for, which was to put.
Right, that's what I was trying to
Those two things.
bounce off the two things. So you got something in your packet, and then what was passed around is proposed. The differences that I see are the 100 acres instead of 50, and the 300 to 500 buffer.
Yeah, those are the changes.
Those are the two changes in what Ligon sent out and what has been brought forward by Planning Commissioner B.
I would suggest one more, just under where it says wetlands, perennial creeks and intermittent streams. That would be extremely difficult for the staff to interpret or enforce. If it said something like jurisdictional waters, I don't know what Chris would think about that, but I mean, you have to delineate wetlands and streams anyway for a 404 permit. So maybe tying it specifically to the jurisdictional determination assuming.
The current,
Perennial anyway.
Yeah, because the creek and the stream is, depending on whether you use three different types of classifications. I mean,
yeah,
there's-
right now, the county code specifies wetlands and perennial creeks, which include everything from rivers all the way down to a body of water that's basically a flowing body of water year round.
So like, for example, the federal law doesn't protect isolated wetlands. It would have to be some sort of contiguous wetland. But there is a.
Well,
there is
no,
a
I mean,
federal-
there's a county code that protects, it, right? So right now, the county code has a minimum 50-foot buffer about all wetlands and a minimum 100-foot buffer about a perennial creek. So all the
Each
creeks,
side of it.
Mill Creek, Jones Creek, Deep
Each side of the
Creek,
stream. Right.
any of these things are all gonna be perennial streams, and their main feeders are all perennial streams.
Besides the wetland.
Well, there's a national wetland inventory, which we have, which you can overlay, that's the starting point. But they all go out, as happened in the case, when the builder wants to do it, he goes out there and they delineate the wetlands, he sends somebody out.
Well, that's what I'm talking about.
Yes, he does it. They do,
Well, I do that.
you do
It's
that.
done by
Yeah.
professional wetland delineators,
Yes.
and it's based on the federal definition of a wetland, which changes all the time in the court of law. That's what I'm suggesting, that we base it on the current, definition. I mean, Chris, you do this
Seems
too.
logical.
Otherwise, this is like a lawsuit waiting to happen.
Again, very loud, yeah, I agree. I mean,
Is it a creek?
you're right, and jurisdictional will hold up
Yeah.
legally, so I don't disagree with that either.
I would call it jurisdictional waters. That's what the
Yeah.
Clean Water Act calls it. If it was Nate. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't know all the places it's wrong in the current county code, but it would be really indefensible.
Well, I mean,
the way it's written.
if that is a much better standard, John, to put in there
Yeah.
from the standpoint of the.
Subject to the county
Clarity.
attorney's approval, but, I mean,
It's
a perfectly good
The spirit
recommendation.
of both is there.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
You're cleaning up a legal clerical issue, which I think is smart to identify a thing.
unfortunately, in the case of conditional use permit, there's going to be a discussion about something like this with a potential developer, and it should be defendable. So they delineate it, the Corps of Engineers confirms it, or the DEQ potentially at some point in the future, because they're the two agencies that do that type of confirmation work. Depending on what the law says at that time. And then there's a line on the plan, and then that becomes the line, and that's what everything's made. And it's jurisdictional waters, I believe, is the definitions.
I don't have any problem with it.
That would be my third comment on those 1 through 7 items that are on this.
Just say, Ligon, you want to clear that and clean that up in the rest of everywhere else. We're just going to put it in this language, it's going to need to be cleaned up everywhere else.
But are we as a group agreeing to these potential changes, or we're
Not yet.
not discussing?
Not yet, it's being,
Okay.
I was gonna say,
That's easy.
there's 7 slightly amended things that make it harder to do a conservation subdivision, basically. And then the trade-off is the increased bonus densities, which makes it more economically viable for a developer. That's what we're talking about, right? Is providing higher density bonuses, which goes towards the housing goal.
right,
But then
But that's in exchange for making it a CUP.
that's in exchange for all these other 7 conditions potentially that we can go through one by one or look at as a whole.
I thought he was talking about,
Well-
make them all CUP and then we'll give you a bonus.
Right.
Now, this is
I mean, you can,
another discussion.
those things as far as jurisdictional waters, I mean, we can add that to the report. We can add, to the final report we present, we can add.
I mean, I like all 7 of these with the 3 changes we just discussed.
Okay.
The 100 acres, the 300, 500 feet in the jurisdictional waters.
Why is 100 acres better than 50?
That's a good question.
Well, I can go back to, somebody just brought up, we're all agreeing to this yet, the answer is no. Early on in this conversation, somebody brought up, why do they think, and in the words politically, right? I think the conservation easement is difficult on purpose. I'm not sure that I'm interested in changing it at all. Or that we should even, as you said earlier in the discussion, 45 minutes ago, that we should even be discussing. So I'm still back to that. I was just waiting. I'm not I'm not a big fan of changing. I did like Darlene's recommendation of making it 100 acres. So,
I mean, she very, very much is interested in having these things go CUP.
yes, I agree with her on that also.
Agree on that.
Yes, I do.
Right. Well, you know, I mean, at some point, the board, I mean, they're asking about buffers here and so forth, and asking for, you know, potential changes in the order.
415.
I mean, the current practice, allowable practice, that you can use unbuildable land, which the county already says, if it's in that block, in that block of natural conservation areas, that means, almost just means it's flood, very close. And if you're allowed to include that in what you're quote unquote giving up to the county,
But
you're not giving up anything.
I think as it says in here, you're not. If it's unbuildable land, it doesn't count.
Shouldn't count.
You don't get a bonus.
But it does currently.
It does.
That's correct.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's the.
also those splits are different. I mean, and, you know, if you've got 40 and you do 50, you can still do a conservation. 40 acres with 50%.
Yes.
So that's in there. It was updated in 2019, so this ordinance was done in 19. If you look it up, you can Google it real quick. But I'm not sure that this is a very, very lengthy discussion. That's just where I'm at right now. Like you mentioned, the first word you mentioned, potential. I'm not sure that who the board who's going to be voting on this is that concerned about potential for conservation easements, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I think it's a safe thing to say that board is going to be encouraged to discuss this in more depth, especially with buffers
Yes.
and mechanisms for maintaining these and making recommendations on case-by-case basis.
I believe that.
That's going to be, the CUP is critical, because if you don't do that, the board never even knows these things are on the table. So we got to at least do that.
But you're
I mean,
increasing the number of houses in here automatically.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. And, you know, there are various things here. I mean, as Ligon said, that 2-acre business about a house minimum out in the county where it's well and septic, obviously, as opposed to, you know, 1 acre or 40,000 square feet. That's a hot button item for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And when you get up there and you hear all the objections to the various things, a lot of times what you're gonna hear is, you know, we don't want any of these lots that are less than, you know, 2 acres. And, you know, we don't want any pressure on well and septic. All right, and that was a thing in the county, that, you know, you really, about 2 acres generally is what you're trying to have, you know, say in an area, and be comfortable with your well and septic. So that's different than what you got in here at the moment, you know, but if you go with something like that, it's one thing, it's not going to be the only thing, but it's one thing that makes the whole, you know, the whole proposal, the whole idea of conservation subdivisions more palatable to the citizens. You know, at least that objection comes off the table. And, you know, that's not to say they can object to other aspects, and they could, and I'm sure they will. In fact, I know they will. But that helps. That's part of it. So that's kind of why that's, you know, why that's in there. That unbuildable land thing, though, that's a giant loophole in the current picture. And it's just a terrible loophole, and it's one of the worst.
Is that acreage tax the same as the buildable acreage?
No, as soon as you put that acreage in there, as soon as you put any of the acreage
Or
in
even
there.
beforehand. If it's truly meeting that definition, which is typically floodplain, then it is not taxed. It's labeled as floodplain and assessed at, depending on the level of where it's at, it could be half of what the normal value is, or it could go to a minimum of 500 per acre assessment.
But when you put land, let's get away from talking about the land that's unbuildable. The other land that you're giving up in your proposal, in order to get a conservation subdivision and get your clustering, that land that becomes protected, say by conservation easement or right by attachment to the deed, that land immediately falls into the category of a 400 right now,
Land use.
$450 an acre for the assessed value. course, then you apply the tax rate, you know what I'm saying, to that. In other words, it becomes immediately taxed at exactly the same rate as land is currently taxed under land use taxation. So that immediately falls to that. So that basically is what happens, which is kind of a good thing because the fact is, as the years go on, the years, often not many years, that conserved land, it's management, it's oversight, and its tax burden will likely transfer to the homeowner association, and out of the hands of the developer. And at that point, if suddenly it was transferred and they had to pay a tax rate on that conserved land, that was, you see what I'm saying, more like a regular market rate, God help them, and they would be not a little bit pleased with that, neither would I, that's totally understand. Which is why it's down there at $450 an acre, which, that's a tax rate, that's low enough, it's not breaking much of anybody's bank. It's not a terrible thing when you put that off to the homeowners after 5 years, 10 years, whatever the plant called for.
So Lincoln, in the last 5 minutes, where are we on conservation subdivisions?
Well, I'm here to go to CUP, and I guess and I think there are a lot of little mechanics and other things that we kind of talked about that we can, in a report that I can kind of get from y'all, we can put together other recommendations. But I guess the other kind of big question I have is if you move it to CUP or allowing higher density bonus, something that, the group all concurs with would be appropriate.
To nail down what the bonus number is?
I don't necessarily have to nail down the bonus number, but just,
I think,
let's say
I would
higher
leave it-
bonus would be appropriate.
I would leave it that at this point, I would put everything CUP. Leave the door open on what's already allowed under the by right, and state that it's appropriate to consider higher densities upon further investigation.
As we also look at things like increased setbacks, buffers,
Yeah,
Taking
get
out
those things
wetlands.
when we look at that. I would do that. I think that's a little bit more conservative, a little bit more responsible, because we do not know, we don't have a clear handle on what could happen to us as a result of having these, as high densities in some of these administrations. That's been a worry. It's a worry of the planning commission, it's a worry of the citizens, and it's a worry of some people on the board. So I think, that needs more look, and that's not a quick thing that we can easily solve here. I don't think we can answer that question. But that's not to take it off the table. That's just to say, let's agree that what the county's got, they can continue to have, it's gotta go CUP. It would be I think it's very helpful if the committee is willing to say, of the various things here, if they're willing to say, suggest that removing unbuildable land from the calculation is something that makes sense and is consistent with the purpose of conservation subdivision. If you want to say that, if we're willing to say that, I think it's headway. I think we've given them something quite
So
substantive.
only 2 of these 7 things is we're saying we want to agree on? Is that what we're saying?
I mean, of course, I'd like to agree on with roofing, but I'm not.
Yeah, which
I'm not-
ones don't we agree on?
But what's attainable, the CUPs clearly is. This unbuildable land thing, I think, is one that can be dealt with here, and it's pretty straightforward, makes real good sense. And to point them in that direction, then that'll help them. I mean, look, when the board has to face the citizens and defend whatever it is they want to do, if they were able to say that they had the support of the Citizens Working Group and they had suggested this, that's a help to them. That's a help to them. And I don't mind, and, depending on what we're talking about, I don't mind.
Isn't all
Get
of this a
nothing.
help to them though? Why only 2 things?
Well, I mean, the things that not necessarily.
I'd like to discuss them further individually.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't do that in the next.
Has
2
there ever
months.
been one at 50 acres
Uh,
submitted?
Yes,
There has been?
yes.
I
So
don't think any-
what I was gonna suggest is, I have a couple examples we could pull from, and, you know, some of these items that are listed in here are only conjecture until we can prove them. And if we can't prove them and look at what the reality of someone tried to do this, okay, let's apply these and see what happens. I don't think we can make a judgment on that because we're going pie in the sky and we don't have anything to base it on. And that's not to say that none of these are credible, but they're all worth holding to a real standard to see what really spins out of it. So we don't repeat the problems of the past that were created when people just blindly made decisions.
I mean, if somebody's got 80 acres and right now they have a right to do this, to just take it away from them without going into a little deeper study, I think. That's the right thing to do.
Well, I still say this is a recommendation when it, if or when, whatever we send to the board, then that's really when, the planning commission's gonna. So I don't think it's really necessary we have to write the ordinance right here, but kind of give some general guidelines. I think we've kind of got that right now. But speaking of which, since time is almost up, I guess in order to keep going through this list here, next 4/15, does that sound like a?
Well, I was hearing some people earlier saying they couldn't do the 15th.
Well, that's one person. I don't know if that's more than one.
Is that only you?
I can do the 15. I can.
I can do 10.
20 seconds, not good.
I can.
15th, anybody?
I could do it.
I can do it.
I guess we do 6:30 then,
That'll be a night meeting.
and we,
I mean, I could zoom in, I mean, I can probably zoom into it, but there's a lot of material on this housing business.
Yeah, I mean,
to talk about, that needs to be discussed.
the meat and potatoes is coming. We got the easy part done today. I mean, we still,
I'd much rather not be in a hurry and be making decisions here in the absence of,
Yeah.
information I think
I
we
mean,
probably should have.
I see that, the map, that's kind of one of the big things that we want to make a recommendation for. So, I think that's definitely we'll use every bit at the next meeting. I think we got some good information on this meeting. So my suggestion is if it's 6:30, next 4:15, we'll just keep digging through this. I'll post the agenda. It'll just essentially be the same agenda as the last one, but just say we're going to continue on with it. And if there's anything I can think of to add or change or anything, I'll send you an email into the week. But if, Jamie, you're okay with it, or next,
Yeah, I'm good. I just want to make sure I'm understanding your map stuff. These are areas that you're suggesting to add to residential uses?
those are just yes, if we're going to look at potential other residential areas, that's not to say that.
Well, I'll just put it out there. I mean, we have some numbers and we didn't get to this part today, but we have some pretty significant numbers. The second part of Darlene's email, which is actually a coincidence. I knew she was working on the conservation stuff, but I didn't know she was working on looking at what we have actually out there available and in inventory. There's some numbers that are going to suggest why we need to add, especially to any density footprint.
I mean, I've got, because we're working with Jamie, I've got very, very detailed data on what is available right now in the way of potential lots that can be built upon that are already zoned residential. I've got a lot of detailed data on that.
Not even looking at any A10, not even looking at any single cuts or any of that side. This is already zoned lots and land that's sitting there available to be built. We're talking 2,000 plus acres.
And Darlene,
That's next meeting though, right?
Yes, that's next meeting. We're not getting into it. I want to put that in your brain and think about between now and next week.
Can I just ask for prepping for the next meeting? We can start with number 4. We're done with conservation.
I don't think we're done, but I think we're starting with number 4.
For now.
Yes, I'll agree to that. I agree to that. We'll circle back to conservation.
I gotta say here that that's one of the things, there's more that we have here. I've got detailed information here and run-ups on the village area, what the situation is in the village area, what we have available, and
What, can we get together this week?
Not really, I can be out of here on Friday, I planned this for a
Oh,
long
you
time, I didn't think we were meeting on the 15th.
Yeah, well, you can email me.
When did you think we were meeting?
I thought it was gonna be a time after that, 22nd, that would be the next time.
We make a motion to, close this one out and start again on the 5th.
So moved.
Second.
All right, all in favor of meeting on the 15th?
6 o'clock.
All right, good. We'll do the 15th and.
that's not gonna solve
Give a motion to close the meeting too.
Motion to close the meeting this night. All right. All right. Good to go.
Thank you.